Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fourth episode of the Urbanites podcast. Today, we're going to be interviewing Ernie Suggs, who is a reporter at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. He has been working there since 1997, and he's originally from New York, but he grew up in Rocky Mount, North Carolina. He graduated from the North Carolina Central University, and he's a recognized journalist as a Harvard University Nieman Fellow. He writes about the people's history during the civil rights movement, along with some of the challenges faced historically by Black colleges in America. So today, the podcast is going to be led by our co-editor-in-chief, Lady Padrino. It's great to have you guys here and hope you enjoy it.
I wanted to start with a question for you in particular, you being involved with the documentary. So in your own words, what is The South Got Something to Say? What does it mean to you?
I think it means that the South is here and is a viable force. The South Got Something to Say can have a lot of meanings. Obviously, when Andre 3000 said it, he was talking about how Southern hip hop was a viable form of this genre, competing against New York and Los Angeles. But the South Got Something to Say can also talk about who we are as Southerners and who we want to be and who we want to represent, how we want to represent ourselves, whether we're from Atlanta or Charlotte or Tennessee or Florida or North Carolina, which is where I went to high school. So the South has always been kind of like this maligned area of the country. And I think that Andre 3000 basically kind of put it out there publicly in 1995 that not only does the music have a lot of influence, but the Southerners and the South also has a lot of influence in terms of what's going on nationally and what's going on globally. So for me, it's a universal phrase that takes on a lot of different meanings.
Excellent. And what did you hope to accomplish with this documentary?
We wanted to tell the story of Atlanta. And we wanted to tell the story of Atlanta through hip hop. I mean, obviously, since around 1995, Atlanta has been the hip hop capital of the country, which means it's been the hip hop capital of the world. So we wanted to kind of really, really tell that story. As I mentioned at the meeting in which you met me, I was born in New York City. So I saw the emergence of hip hop. You know, I saw it with my own eyes, just how DJs were in the park and doing their thing and, connecting power to the lampposts. So I saw it all kind of grow. So now that I'm an adult and I live in Atlanta, I've seen it move and I've seen it shift to this whole Southern aesthetic. And it all started like in 1995 when Andre 3000 said the South got something to say. And I think it's very important when you look at the history of it, you look at that moment, obviously when he said it, it didn't change automatically. But it still took a couple of years, after Southern Playalistic came out in 1994, Outkast's second album, ATLiens, came out in 1995. Goody Mob's Soul Food came out in 1995. So that right there kind of lit the fire for what we have now with T.I., with Lil Yachty, with Lil Baby, Future. Killer Mike just got nominated for 3 Grammy Awards for including Best Rap Album and Best Rap Song and Performance. It's right out of Atlanta. He's right in our documentary, talking about it. So Atlanta is definitely the place. So we wanted to tell that story. But we also wanted to tell if you were to look at this documentary and not know anything about music or care about music, you can still get a lot out of it because it tells the history of Atlanta. Because if you look at the birth of hip hop, which was in 1973, that's the same year that Maynard Jackson was elected Atlanta's first Black mayor. So you got 50 years of hip hop. At the same time, you have 50 years of continuous Black leadership in the city of Atlanta. So what was happening in Atlanta for the last 50 years? We had all Black mayors from Maynard Jackson up until Andre Dickens now. We had the 1979 to 1982 Atlanta child murders, which was the biggest, crime in the history of Georgia, where 29 known Black boys and girls were killed. We have the uprising, we have the 1996 Olympics, we have the uprisings of 2020 that came out of COVID and the deaths of George Floyd and Rayshard Brooks here in Atlanta. So we talk about all of that stuff as kind of how Atlanta developed over the last 50 years, while hip hop was also going on. So it's kind of a parallel story. And if you look at it from not a hip hop standpoint, if you're just kind of looking at it from a historian, or if you're watching it, you live in, you know, England or Spain or whatever, and you're watching this, you can say, oh, this is an interesting story about Atlanta, and it has a pretty good soundtrack. So that's what we wanted to do, tell Atlanta's story through the soundtrack.
Yeah, and I think if I might add, you guys did an amazing job. I very much enjoyed watching it. And some of the comments that you said are a great segue into the next couple of questions.
So y'all saw it?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
You liked it?
I absolutely loved it. It was amazing.
Okay.
And the way you guys went about it and really timelining and telling the history and digging in and going back in time and really taking you back in time into the people who inspired hip hop and where hip hop comes from. I think you guys did a beautiful job at it.
Thank you.
What were you saying?
No, I said thank you.
Oh yeah, it was amazing. I have a couple questions, like specific questions about some of the things you touched on briefly, but one of them is the Source Awards marked a pivotal moment in Southern culture, and it started as a simple statement, the South got something to say, and became somewhat of a movement that would change hip hop forever. Do you think that with all the East Coast, West Coast tension that was going on at the time, it was kind of like no one was thinking about the South?
Yeah, no one. I mean, if you look at if you really reconstruct the 1995 Source Awards, and I'll send you, actually, I'll put it in the chat. I did a story that basically reconstructed the 1995 Source Awards. It's called The Oral History of the South Got Something to Say. So I'll put that in the chat. But what was happening, in my estimation, is that these, I mean, you guys probably weren't even born then, but the East Coast, West Coast conflict was really big. And it was also really kind of stupid, where you have these two coasts fighting over, hold on.
Yeah, it was the
you would have these two coasts. Yeah, you had these two coasts fighting over, you know, Smokey Robinson wasn't fighting Otis Redding, you know, about stuff. So you had these two coasts, and then it all kind of culminated at the Source Awards. And I think what was going on is you had all this East Coast and West Coast stuff going on. Nobody was paying attention to the South. And I think that the Andre 3000, whether or not he consciously did this or not, kind of saw an opportunity that was out there and given to them that were like, wow, okay, everybody's fighting. Let us go in there and just kind of take over. So I don't know if it was a conscious decision by him, but it was a pivotal decision because they used this opportunity for the world to see these two bickering sides and to just kind of sneak in there from the back and be like, okay, now we're going to take over. We're in charge. And arguably for the last 25 years, Atlanta's been in charge. I mean, LA is an afterthought. I mean, Kendrick Lamar's from LA and he's like the man. He was here recently for a concert at the One Music Fest and it was like 200,000 people here. So people love him. You know, people all of a sudden love Snoop Dogg, although Snoop was kind of crazy back in those days. The East Coast has Jay-Z and Nas and has kind of these iconic figures in hip hop. But Atlanta has been very, very consistent. It's been very consistent over the last 25 years of just producing different kinds of music, trap music, crunk music, you know, snap music, dance music. So anthems, which are really, really big. So Atlanta's just been very, very consistent while the other coasts have been just kind of like flailing away or producing that one big giant megastar. And pretty much that's it. Atlanta's been just very, very even with how they've kind of come to dominate the scene.
Absolutely. I thought that was very interesting, especially the fact that, like you said, I'm sure that was not his intention at the moment. You know, he was just, he saw a platform, he saw the moment, and he was like, hey, I'm just going to throw this out there. Like, don't count us out. And it became this beautiful movement that just never stopped.
Yeah, he was frustrated. I mean, they won best rap group, new rap group, and the people were booing them. Salt and Pepper, I don't know if you actually saw it, but Salt and Pepper, when they announced their name, was very, very derisive as to how they said Outkast, you know, because everybody expected Bone Thugs and Harmony to win. So it was very, very, what he said was out of frustration. And it was out, and I think sometimes when you say things out of frustration, that's when it's the most beautiful and the most poignant and the most meaningful. And I think that's what that was. I don't think it was calculated, but I just think it was just like, hey, I'm frustrated. We just won and you're booing us. And we got a lot to say, and we're going to say a lot.
That was beautiful.
So I just put that link in the chat, the oral history of that night.
Thank you. I have another question for you. It says, Pete Nice said people from the Bronx who founded hip hop were from the South, and it's almost like you had to go up north to be heard. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it's true. I mean, I think that's also part of kind of like American history and a part of American history of migration and reverse migration. As I mentioned, I was born and raised in New York City. But my mother is from North Carolina. She moved to New York City in the 1960s and then moved back to North Carolina in the 1980s. So I was born in New York and raised in North Carolina for high school and college and eventually. So I'm kind of a Southerner now. But you had all these incidents where, when there was a saying when I lived in New York that you were going down south, you're going down south for the summer, you got folks down south. So it's not a surprise that all these New York rappers had all these roots in North Carolina or Georgia or Tennessee or Alabama, because we were constantly moving back and forth between northern cities and southern cities. So like I said, like myself, if I were in there, you would say, oh, Ernie Suggs is, he was born in New York, but, every summer he was in Rocky Mountain, North Carolina, down south. So I think all of us who grew up in New York and grew up in urban places have these roots in southern cities. So it's not a stretch to understand where a lot of those early people came from.
Beautiful. And I know you touched on this a little bit earlier, but I wanted to get a little bit more on it because at this point in the documentary, it became very clear that this was a big part of that movement, and you touched on it briefly. But question is, Maynard Jackson in 1974 wanted to create strong arts initiative and created the Bureau of Cultural Art Affairs. It may seem like nothing to take 1% of sales tax to allocate to open the door for Black expressive art, but how important would you say that this was at that moment?
Oh, it was very important because it opened up arts to Black and brown communities who otherwise were not being given those opportunities. So when you think about, Atlanta in the 1970s, coming out of the civil rights movement of the 1960s, 1974 is only 6 years after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in the South. And it was in Memphis, Tennessee, but he was killed in the South. And you still had a lot of very, very disenfranchised, segregated Black people in Georgia and in Atlanta. So Maynard Jackson's election was historic and landmark. And racially divided. So when he came in, he wanted to kind of put together programs which would empower Black people. If you look deeper in the building of Atlanta's airport, Atlanta has the biggest and busiest airport in the world. And that reason that it was built when Maynard Jackson and Andy Young were coming up is that they made sure that contracting be distributed evenly or at least equitably, so that Blacks and women would be able to get in and have contracts in building this airport, so that not only 99% of rich white men were getting these contracts, but also women and Black people, and everybody was getting rich. So he was kind of spreading that out. So while he was spreading out businesses and making sure that everybody was equally involved in how the city was built, he was also making sure that our arts culture and our Black kids were being exposed to things that otherwise they would not be exposed to, like the arts. So you had community centers coming up. You still have these community centers now that weren't around when Maynard Jackson started. You have these dances, you have talent shows, and all this stuff. You have skate parties, and all of this stuff kind of fed into who we are now, because the kids who were at these parties are Jermaine Dupree now. They're Rico Wade. They're Dallas Austin and Ludacris. These prominent, Ludacris, I don't know where he stands, but he is not, it's not all because of him, but just think about the fact that with him being in these Fast and Furious movies, he is in like $1 billion industry, right? Because he's in these movies. You look at people like Lil Yachty, who's a famous rapper. His father is a famous photographer. His grandfather was one of the first Black photographers at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. So it's all kind of generational, and it all kind of comes out of that period in the early 1970s when Maynard Jackson said, "We're going to expand the arts. We just want to make sure these kids have an opportunity." And out of this opportunity came all of this, what you see now, all this, whether it's visual artists, politicians, Andre Dickens, the mayor of Atlanta, came out of that. You saw in the documentary where he was part of a dance crew. Keisha Lance Bottoms, where I'm mad at her for not telling us this before that, but Keisha Lance Bottoms danced with Arrested Development for one concert. So it's like, the mayor of Atlanta, who's now an advisor to President Biden, who's one of the most powerful man in the world. Keisha Lance Bottoms was an Arrested Development dancer. So it's just like all of it is kind of just connected, and it's all stemmed from the fact that we wanted to have expressive art in the city of Atlanta targeted towards Black kids.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I have for you, the Atlanta music scene started in skating rinks. This has been depicted in many movies over the years, one of the most famous being ATL. Would you say that, what about these skating rinks made them the spot to be at for the music scene? Why did it start here?
Well, because they were cheap. It was a cheap form of entertainment, and it was a safe form of entertainment where you can drop your kids off. Back in the days when you can do this, you can drop your kids off for 4 hours or 5 hours on Saturday or Sunday afternoon and know that they were going to be somewhere safe. They were going to be with their friends. They were going to be supervised, and there was going to be good music. And again, at the time when the skating rinks were becoming popular, you started seeing like kind of disco. You started seeing the advent of dancing. Then you started seeing, as hip hop became more popular, hip hop sounds and DJs coming in to play rap music and to play hip hop music. And for these kids to come in and say, okay, this is my crew. So we're going to form a dance group. We're going to form a skating group, and we're going to see if we can be better than the group that was better last week. So you had this area, these skating rinks, that were these free, open, safe places that can harbor creativity, harbor fun, and you can go there and just kind of do your thing on a Saturday and Sunday and go home, maybe win a $500 prize. But these again are these incubator places that that spring almost, you don't really think about it while it's going on, but spring so much creativity.
That's awesome. How did it feel to get to sit down and work with so many big names in the industry, like Jermaine Dupree, Benzino, Rasheeda, T.I., Run DMC, just to name a few?
It was great. I mean, I've been a reporter for a long time, so I've met pretty much everybody. So there's nobody who I'm not starstruck. The only time I was ever starstruck, and I'm a huge Prince fan, but I wasn't even starstruck when I met Prince. But the only time I was ever starstruck was when I met Michael Jackson. And I guess that's for obvious reasons. But it was cool, sitting down with Killer Mike and Jermaine and T.I. and Rasheeda and Jordan. It was cool meeting all these people because I enjoy their music and I enjoy their stories. And I also think that at this point, Atlanta is very interesting because it's a big city, but it's also a small city. So it's like everybody knows each other. So, now I didn't know a lot of these people that I talked to, but now I feel that I do. I feel that we're friends now, and I can, call somebody, or, as a matter of fact, I'm going, I wrote a book, The Many Lives of Andrew Young, and we just got a copy of it signed for Killer Mike. So at some point this week, I'm going to go to Killer Mike's office or his barbershop and give him a signed copy of it. So I think it's been great kind of getting to know these people, it's almost like getting to know your neighbors, because Atlanta is still such a small town where everybody knows each other. At the premiere, everybody was there, from Senator Raphael Warnock to Pastor Troy, sitting next to each other, and, just kind of vibing and kind of knowing each other. I don't know if that necessarily can happen in New York City or Miami or Los Angeles, where everybody knows each other. And, you saw in the movie where Keisha Lance Bottoms was able to call T.I. and Killer Mike to come quell violence. That doesn't happen in other cities because T.I. and Killer Mike know the city, and they know some of these kids who are out there destroying the city, and they can speak to them directly. So that's the difference here in Atlanta.
That's beautiful. And it brings me to my final question for you, which I think you like segued it so beautifully without even trying to. But so many amazing artists that come out of Atlanta and continue to this day to come out of Atlanta. So I think it's safe to say that the South still has something to say. What about Southern culture makes it such a breeding ground for artists?
I think Southern culture is a breeding ground for artists because it is so welcoming and it's so collaborative. And I think it's embedded in who we are as Southerners. I mean, if you really, really look at it, there's a part in the movie where it talks about the 4 pillars of music, soul music. And if you think about it, these people came from Atlanta, from Georgia. Otis Redding, Little Richard, James Brown, and Ray Charles all came from Georgia. Just think about when you look at the history of soul music and where you put these 4. These 4 obviously in the top 10, and they all came from Georgia, all around the same period of time. So, we grew up listening to that. We grew up listening to their kind of music, cleaning up the house on Saturday afternoons, listening to James Brown and Otis Redding, so they listen to it, we listen to it, and the artists now listen to it. You think about even like, let's take, for example, Mojo, who was the first rapper in Atlanta. Mojo's album was live instrumentation, or his song was live instrumentation, and the lead singer of Brick played guitar on Mojo's first album. Now, the lead singer of Brick is the father of Sleepy Brown, who is the one of the founders of Organized Noise. Organized Noise, with the Dungeon family, started Outkast. They started Goody Mob. So you see how that kind of like all goes together. Whereas, Brick played for Mojo, who his father is the father of Sleepy Brown, who is the producer of Outkast and Goody Mob. So it all kind of like goes together in this kind of continuous loop. As I mentioned, a man named Philip McCullum was one of the first Black photographers at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. His son Shannon was a photographer, a freelance kind of industry photographer who, shot album covers and, all over the world shot album covers and rappers in their early stages. His son is Lil Yachty. So it's like, you're like, oh, Lil Yachty is Shannon's son, so it's like all of it is kind of intertwined. So we're all kind of like a big family here where everyone knows each other. Everyone eats at everybody's house. Everybody can, everybody has each other's phone numbers because it's all like this one big collaborative family that if they weren't rapping and if I wasn't a newspaper reporter, I might be a postman delivering to their house and knowing what they're, knowing what they're doing over the weekend and going to their house for a cookout. So it's all kind of the same thing in different occupations.
That's amazing. I wanted to very quickly thank you for giving us this opportunity to sit down and talk to you, and also for the amazing walking tour that you gave us in Atlanta.
Thank you.
I learned so much about the history of Atlanta through that, and just to be able to tie it into this documentary and to see more where hip hop comes from and the roots of it all was amazing and beautiful. So thank you so much for all of that. I will never forget that walk in Atlanta. I will never forget. You took us to places that were mind-boggling. So,
well, thank you. It was a pleasure.
To the Ren.
Yeah, I know.
That was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. So thank you for that.
But you didn't come back with us, right? Didn't you have to go back early?
I had to go back to the awards.
So did they tell you about what we saw?
Where'd you go?
We went to this place called the Jackson Street Bridge. You ever heard of that?
No.
So Google that when you get a chance. It's the most photographed place in Atlanta, and it's a bridge, and it overlooks the city. And it was on the way back, so you all could have gone. It overlooks the city, and it's like this beautiful panoramic view of the city. So people kind of stand on the back of the bridge and take selfies. And if you watch that show, The Walking Dead, it is like, I guess it's the opening scene or the significant image of it, of the city of it, because Walking Dead takes place in Atlanta. So that's where we went. So that was kind of like that last place to kind of see. Oh, was that you or me? I wanted people to take photos of it there. So next time you come, you gotta see the Jackson Street Bridge.
Absolutely. Thank
Yeah.
you so much. The history was baffling. To walk the streets that MLK walked, to pass by Ebenezer, to see where his final resting place was. It was a beautiful experience.
Well,
So
thank you. I'm glad you were able to go.
thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for trusting us and continuing to spread the story that you're trying to cultivate here. We have no words.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And send me the link when the story comes out.
Absolutely,
And
absolutely.
if you have any other questions, just call me or email me and I'll get right back to you.
Sounds great. Thank you so much.
All right.
So-
Thanks a lot.
Have a good
See you
day.
later. All right. This is the ATL sign.
Yee.
All right. See y'all later.
Bye, baby.